I knew something was off from the moment I got to work and saw some guy leaving my boss's office. Sometimes you just get a feeling about certain people, you know? There wasn't anything that really stood out about him. He didn't wear a black cape or hood to hide devil's horns. He didn't have soul-piercing red eyes and a sinister smirk. He didn't rub his hands maliciously while cackling as he passed me or anything like that. He was just a normal guy in a normal business suit, but when he walked by me, I got that feeling that you get when you miss a step and you're about to fall on your face, before you realize you're in bed and it was just a dream. The problem was that with this guy, there wasn't that immediate relief afterwards. I was just feeling cold at the pit of my stomach. My boss motioned for me to come in. "Michael, can I have a word?" I tucked my construction hat under my arm and stepped into his office. "Who the hell was that?" I asked, as soon as the stranger was out of earshot. He shrugged. "New supplier, have a seat." I sat down. "What's he a supplier of?" He looked at the contract on his desk and read, "EnduroFlex heavy-duty asphalt. We should be getting our first shipment sometime this week." I've never heard of EnduroFlex. "Well, neither have I. It's new and dirt cheap, so we're going to give it a try. But that's not why I called you in here," he said. "It's not?" He waved a dismissive hand. No. I wanted to talk to you about your schedule. We've had a rough winter. You know the ropes. The roads need fixing, and the city wants it done pronto. We're going to have to work around the clock to get this done, or risk losing the contract to the competitors. I'm going to need you to work nights for the next month." "Oh, you can't be serious," I answered. "Oh man, I hated working nights. I'd done my time in my first couple years working for the company. A night here or there was fine, but a whole month? Talk about a punch to the balls." I tried not to show my anger as I gripped my hat tighter. He continued, "I need someone with experience out there, someone who can get the job done fast. You can go home today, Michael, get some rest, come back tomorrow night. I'll have your assignments ready by then." "You're the boss," I mumbled as I got up and left. I took the free time off and tried to adjust to my new schedule, but on such a short notice, coffee was the only thing keeping me awake through the night. The first couple of shifts went by without incident. I wasn't sure when we'd start using the new asphalt, or if I'd even notice a difference when we finally did. But if what happened a few nights ago was any indication, then yes, there was a very noticeable difference. Chuck and I rolled up to our first assignment of the night, a main road going through the suburbs. The day and evening crews had already stripped the street and laid down fresh gravel. I could even see a short strip of fresh, still steaming asphalt on the other side of the median. If we'd missed the evening crew, we hadn't missed them by long. Still, it was weird for them not to be here for the handoff, but it was even weirder that they left the paver at the site instead of bringing it back to us so we could fill it up before coming. The boss had just assumed they were still working and had told us to take the truck and join them there. "Well, where's the crew?" asked Chuck. "I must have clocked out already," I replied. "Where's our crew?" he continued. I hadn't noticed the rest of my team hadn't shown up yet. I mean, technically we could do the work with just the two of us, but it was unusual not to have a few extra pairs of hands and eyes. "I don't know," I replied. "Ask dispatch?" He let out a groan and grabbed his phone while I exited the truck and checked the road. The gravel was nice and even, ready for asphalt to be laid over it. It wasn't going to take us very long to get the job done, I thought. Chucks popped his head out of the window. "They called in sick." I raised an eyebrow. "All of them?" He gave me an exaggerated shrug. "Yeah, all of them." I rolled my eyes and sighed loudly. "Alright, let's get this show on the road. The boss wants this street ready to drive on by morning. Park the truck, I'll get the paver." I was already pretty irritated about having to drive the paver all the way back to fill it up again, so when I approached it and realized the evening crew had left it running, I nearly blew a gasket. Anyone could have wandered by and stolen it. Any kid could have slipped behind the wheel and gotten himself or someone else killed. And if that wasn't bad enough, they left nearly a full load of asphalt in the back. I could already picture myself wasting half the night struggling to clear it out now that it had had the chance to harden. I stomped the rest of the way and climbed on the back to get a better look inside. To my relief, the asphalt was still steaming hot and didn't appear to have set yet. I grabbed a rake and ran it across the surface. Yep, still good. What a relief. I slipped behind the driver's seat, hit the gas and turned her around. We did a U-turn to the other side of the median, where I waited for Chuck. It wasn't long before I saw the reflector strips of his construction vest. I rolled down the window and motioned for him to go around the back to help guide me. I could have managed without him, and him without me, but protocol was protocol. He gave me the thumbs up and I started pouring the asphalt. The paver screamed in protest. Imagine the shriek of a cat put through an amplifier at a death metal concert. In my mirror, I could see Chuck covering his ears and turning away. I stopped and jumped out of the paver. I was starting to understand why it hadn't been emptied. Something caught on the feeder conveyor? I asked. Chuck shook his head. Not from what I can see. The asphalt came out just fine. Damn thing's just really loud. What about in the gears? Nope. I gave the paver a quick inspection, but everything looked normal to me. Ear protection? I offered. Please, he replied. We each put on a pair of noise suppression headphones and went back to our duties, this time relying solely on hand gestures. I could hear the mechanical shrieks even through the muffling headpieces, but I tried to work past it and keep pouring, hoping that whatever was causing the disturbance would eventually resolve itself. Hopefully it would stop before waking up the whole neighborhood. We'd barely gotten halfway through the strip of road that needed to be paved before Chuck motioned for me to stop. I stopped the process, but the screams continued this time. Maybe the issue was with the engine. I pulled the key from the ignition. The mechanical shrieks diminished, but I could still hear something. Before I could look back, Chuck was pounding at the window. He was yelling something and talking really fast, but I couldn't hear him over the headphones. As soon as I pulled them off to listen to him, my ears were flooded with the unholy sound coming from behind the paver. The volume slowly lowered, but Chuck didn't bother repeating himself. He opened the door, grabbed me by the vest and pulled me out of the vehicle. What the hell is going on? I asked angrily. Chuck didn't answer, just dragged me around the back where, to my horror, I found a human-shaped bump in the asphalt. Oh fucking hell, I whispered. I didn't even think to question how it had happened. I hadn't even felt the paver run over anything. Had I been that careless? The lump suddenly moved. Its chest sunk and it suddenly let out an agonized scream. Oh my god, he's still alive, said Chuck. We need to get him out, I answered. In a panic, I unhooked the rake from the back of the paver and used it to try and strip the asphalt away. I dug desperately, my trembling hands barely able to keep hold of the handle as I imagined the burnt face I'd uncover beneath. Chuck just stood there in shock, and I didn't have the mental fortitude to think to have him call an ambulance. I dug and dug and dug, and then I hit gravel. I wasn't able to register what was going on. I kept digging and dragging the rake around in every direction, but all I ever reached was more gravel. There's no one there, whispered Chuck. But I started, staring at the ground in disbelief. I dug out every inch of where the silhouette had been, but Chuck was right. There was nothing underneath. An air pocket shaped like a human. What about the scream? I asked. He pointed to the paver. It was coming from that thing, right? I nodded hesitantly. You're right. We'd both heard the scream coming from the pavement itself. I was sure of it. We looked at one another for a moment as we tried to decide what to do. My heart was beating so hard I thought I was going to pass out. I went into autopilot. I don't even remember walking back to the paver, and I can only vaguely recall telling Chuck we had to get the job done. I started the paver up again and ignored the inhuman screeches coming from it as asphalt began pouring out. This time, I made it all the way down the strip before I stopped and realized Chuck wasn't following. I looked in the rearview mirror and found him still standing at the spot where the air bubble had been. He wasn't looking at the hole I dug in the pavement though. He was looking at another lump. My eyes traveled up the road of smoking asphalt to the dozens of human-shaped bumps leading all the way to the back of my vehicle. You can only deal with so much fear before you start to go numb. I parked and stepped out of the paver. I could hear the figures screaming. All of them were screaming so loud it was sickening. They weren't forming sentences or even words, just ungodly, agonized, inhuman moans of absolute torment. They were writhing, shuffling, shifting in every direction, like skiers caught in an avalanche. Some appeared to be facing up, while others were on their knees and seemed caught in an avalanche. While others were on their knees and seemed to be trying to crawl away, but could barely move from the weight of the molten rock covering them like a blanket. I could hear the gravel underneath them crackling, and the asphalt above them shifting and buckling as the figures reached out for freedom. Oh, it was horrible. I grabbed the rake and desperately ran it over the bumps, convinced I could somehow save and unearth the figures trapped inside. But just like before, there was nothing but street underneath the asphalt. I couldn't understand what I was seeing. It was like a magic trick had gone wrong. It was impossible. I thought I was losing my mind every time I turned the asphalt over, but thankfully I wasn't the only one seeing this. Chuck could see them. I could see the terror in his eyes as he just stood there and watched me. In a way, it was comforting not to go through this alone, even though he wasn't being much help. Black, rocky fingertips began stretching out from the flat surface next to me. That's when I dropped the rake and backed onto the median. More fingers, then hands, and then faces emerged from everywhere, covering every inch of the asphalt. There were hundreds of them, maybe thousands. I'm not sure. I could see their features more clearly now, as though the surface had become a wax mask. I could see individual creases in their fingers. I could make out their noses, sunken lips, and wide-open mouths as they continued to scream for help. I will never forget the sounds of those cries. And then I heard the compact roller starting up, with Chuck at its helm. He looked at me with the eyes of a shell-shocked soldier. "We have to get the job done," he said. I couldn't stop him. Hell, I didn't even try. I just watched in shock as he began flattening the asphalt. I remember the crunching sound as he passed over the silhouettes trapped in the rocks. It reminded me of the sound my arm had made when I fell from the jungle gym in grade school and broke it in 3 places. "It's just the job," he mouthed. "We have to get the job done." As he rolled over the lumpy strip, the screams became morphed in a way I couldn't properly explain to you. It was the sound equivalent of trying to drink with a broken straw. The noise was still there, but it couldn't quite make it out. Chuck ran over the pavement as many times as it took for it to become acceptably flat. I could see him repeating the same 6 words over and over to himself. The compact roller came to a stop, and he sat there, with his head in his hands. I think he might have been crying. The nightmare was over. I swallowed hard as I looked at the street. I could still see the faces, now stretched out and flat as pancakes. They were still screaming, but the sound was muffled, like they were yelling into a pillow or something. I just stood there, watching and listening to the chorus of pain for hours. It wasn't until the asphalt had completely dried and hardened that the screams finally stopped. Or maybe they were just too low for me to hear them anymore, I'm not sure. The pavement took 6 whole hours to dry, 6 times as long as it normally would. And I stood there the whole time. I went home when the sun came out, still in shock from what I had seen. I called in sick from my next few shifts. Today I drove back to that street. Maybe it was morbid curiosity, Or maybe I needed closure. I don't know. Maybe I was hoping the pavement would look normal to me, and I'd just move on, you know? I should have left well enough alone. When I looked at the road, I could still barely make out their twisted, grief-stricken faces on the porous surface. They were on that street. And on every street we've paved since then.